This is Football at 4.
Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It's brought to you by Bet365. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. It is the Sports Bash live on 97.3 ESPN. Geoff Mosher and the crew from Inside the Birds. They are at the Combine, and obviously that gets you ready for the NFL Draft. We'll take a look at some of the things that they're noticing out there at the draft. We'll get Moshe's take on some of the things that happened this week around the Eagles. Also, that poll yesterday, I guess it was the Nflpa poll that had a strong support for one Nick Sirianni. The Eagles finished 4th overall as a organization for just about everything. When you look at food and travel and how they handle things and all this stuff, the Eagles, and this is, I want to get Jeff's take on how much do we put into the poll that was put out there yesterday, because one of the things out there is, that the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, Nick Sirianni, he got an A. So how much stock do we put into the answers these players gave? And if that's the case, is that a good sign moving forward that the Eagles made the right decision with Nick Sirianni? And I think most people, look, there are some people out there that think that they should have moved on. He's a lame duck coach. And there's other people that I think understand that Nick has done a pretty good job. But the fact that the NFLPA player poll suggests that the Eagles head coach, they liked him. They gave him an A. I want to bring Geoff Mosher from Inside the Birds podcast in. We'll talk about that. He's at the Combine and many more. But what does that say to you, Jeff, that the players, the Eagles, said, no, our head coach is an A? Does it sound like that there's overwhelming support for Nick?
I think there's a couple ways to interpret it, Mike. Obviously, all positive. You got an A, right? But what I would like to know, and I haven't had a whole amount of time to research it or read up more on it, is what was the criteria that they were supposed to judge the grading on? Is it competence, meaning X's and O's, or, just your overall football acumen? Or was this like the rest of the poll and more of an environmental judgment as far as, like, do you treat guys well? Are you the best intentions for your players? So I would like to know that, because to me, that's an important distinction. And then also it would be important to know, when were the final tallies due by? Because obviously the Eagles had a very top-heavy season compared to the last 6 weeks. But if the voting was already done before, or not the voting, but the judging, marking was done before the last 6 weeks, would that have been different? And then also, whenever you get into these player polls, you do wonder, did everybody take it seriously, or were guys just checking off A, B, which we sometimes see with like top 100 voting or poll voting and things like that. But I do think, obviously, it speaks well. But I did read that the Browns, I think, got really bad grades on coaching, and they were in the playoffs and won 11 games. So that's an interesting juxtaposition to me. Are you being judged on how good of a coach you are, or just how well you treat your players?
Yeah, well, 100% of the players felt that Nick Sirianni is efficient with their time. They ranked 1st overall in that aspect. And also the players felt that he is very willing to listen to the locker room. He finished 7th overall when it came to that, which is interesting because we had that quote the other day in the Marcus Hayes piece that said that players get treated differently if you're like a younger player, if you're new to the team. So it says in this voting anyway that Sirianni's very willing to listen to the locker room and that he's very efficient with the time.
I mean, that doesn't surprise us at all, and it shouldn't, right? We've had a lot of conversations about this. What is one of the reasons that a very awkward and clunky defensive coordinator change, play caller change, was made in the middle of the year? Well, that's because there were players speaking up about their issues with play calling or just in general defensive staff communication there. So, yes, he listened to his players. Now, that goes back to the confidence part. Did that work? It did not. So I think in the grand scheme of things, it is very important that he is known as a guy who listens to his players, especially because when the Eagles hire head coaches, what do they hire for? Do they hire for scheme, or do they hire for a captain of a ship type person. B. It's always been B. They don't hire because a guy comes in here and is known for being a Shanahan-like or McVay-like wizard. So that's what he was hired to be, and he has been that guy, and his players appreciate it and support it and gave him high marks. I just stopped short of trying to take any of these grades for any of these teams and then trying to maybe extrapolate that or say, well, what does that mean in terms of success on the field? That there's a danger there that I don't want to make that direct link, because I think, again, there are some really good teams on the field, right, wins and losses, that did not score highly in some of these categories. So you just never really know what to make of it all.
All right, Geoff Mosher, football is
That's all
for.
people care about, right? I mean, Mike, I don't interrupt, but that's all people really care about, right? Is the team going to win or lose? Not.
Well,
culture is important, but not how you feel about being treated and time efficiency. I mean, people might argue that, of course, you got high marks in time efficiency. Who practices less and gives their players more time than the Philadelphia Eagles?
Yeah. Well, and I thought it was interesting, like Jeffrey Lurie, he gets good grades, whereas Hunt wins the Super Bowl and he was last.
Great. That's my point exactly.
Yeah, I like that was a little perplexing to me. I always thought the Hunts were well respected and it was just well run, even when they weren't the best organization. And now you're saying, well, the players they're voting him as the last. So you're right. Got to take with a grain of salt there. Were you surprised? Nick Sirianni, I don't know if he went out of his way, but the way he worded it was, the reason I hired Kellen Moore, I guess everybody just assumes that Roseman and Lurie have a lot to do with that. But do you think that Kellen Moore was a Nick Sirianni hire?
I mean, I don't think it was. I don't think Nick had no part in it. But obviously, Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie interviewed Kellen Moore. The same year that they interviewed Nick Sirianni and others for the head coaching job, right? So you can draw the dots there yourself. It was not. I can't imagine that it was only Nick and Nick only's idea to talk to Kellen Moore about the job.
So when Sirianni talks about marrying these two schemes together, one of the things I want to kind of get from you is, what is stuff that Moore does that Sirianni didn't do that they need to add to this offense? Like, what are some of the things that Sirianni's offense lacked that Moore can add?
It's a great question. We talked about it a little bit. We can expand on it. I will just say that we've all been people change sometimes and they adapt to their environment. Vic Fangio is a good example too. We're going to talk about Kellen Moore, but Vic Fangio, people think of the Fangio scheme and its quarters coverage and zone and a zone. If you go look, he actually played a decent amount of man coverage last year in Miami and probably pressured more than he's done in the past, probably adapting to his personnel. So I don't want to sit here and say, here's what Kellen Moore is going to do in Philadelphia because he did it in Dallas and he did it in L.A., and say that means it's definitely going to happen here in Philadelphia. But what I can tell you is that while he's been an offensive coach, his schemes have been very motion-heavy, very shift-heavy, a guy who goes under center and runs the ball from under center, which those three things right there that I just said are not things you would commonly associate with Nick Sirianni's offense. And Nick Sirianni is obviously they've created an offense that is a little bit more schematically heavy in Philadelphia than what he did in Indianapolis when he didn't have a quarterback like Jalen Hurts. But when he was in Indianapolis coming up under Frank Reich and before that in L.A. and been with Todd Haley, Nick Sirianni was mostly a West Coast offense type of guy. But Kellen Moore, not really as much. Kellen inherited or learned some of those concepts under Mike McCarthy, but he has always been a spread offense, somewhat of an Eric Coryell vertical routes guy too. So to get to what you're saying, the marriage of the two philosophies is an interesting choice of words from Nick Sirianni, because you're not exactly marrying two offenses that have a whole lot of common. When we think of marrying our significant others, we think, oh, you have the same core values as me. We're in love. Let's get married, right? This is different. So you wonder how much quote-unquote marrying is going on, or is it like Kellen gets to run the offense, but let's get the tush-push in there because that's worked for us.
Yeah, you're wondering is that something that's going to stay or go? I would imagine that stays. Now, how much if Kelsey returns, how much is his role in the success of the tush push? I guess we'll find out whether or not Kelsey comes back if they keep that thing in there. You're at the Combine, which is a time where a lot of people are around, GMs, coaches, a lot of buzz. But one of the big buzz is about Hassan Reddick. So both Roseman and Sirianni talked about it on Tuesday. They didn't really give an answer, but is there any talk about what kind of interest there is going to be in Reddick? And as you're watching, draft possibles out there, I saw a mock draft yesterday that had the Eagles taking an edge rusher at number 22, which kind of adds fuel to the Reddick being moved fire, I guess.
It does, but it doesn't. I mean, no matter what, if Hassan Reddick's on the team, it's the last year of his deal anyway. So and the Eagles always draft for the future. And if you're looking beyond next year at defensive end, who are you looking at? You're looking at, Hassan Reddick entering free agency, Josh Sweat maybe being on the last year of that extension, or maybe even himself being close to free agency. Brandon Graham, is he going to be back 2 years from now? So really they have Nolan Smith, right, as their youngest building block at edge rusher, and not too much after that. So, knowing the Eagles' history of drafting early, drafting in advance, to me, it's not a cause and effect that whoever you saw got mocked to the Eagles. Was it the UCLA kid? I assume, Laitu?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, I didn't even know. I haven't even seen it. I'm just guessing. That doesn't surprise me, because it's more to me about whoever did that mock draft understanding the positional value in where the Eagles are drafting and what they historically do in the first round.
Yeah, that was the latest Mel Kiper mock draft that came out yesterday. They did go edge rusher there, UCLA. And a guy who has will need a medical clearance. It will probably be an issue for him. He had some neck issues, similar to like DK Metcalf. So that would be something there. So you're at the Combine. I know the corners today. I mean, that's a spot that everybody's kind of taking a look at. And James Bradbury came up the other day. And I don't know, were you surprised as how matter-of-fact Roseman seemed to be with Bradbury? I mean, he didn't even he's signed. He's in our plans.
Yeah, I was. Yes and no, because it's not that I expect him to forecast what he's going to do in that situation. And I remember being here, I guess it was 10, 11 years ago now, when Nnamdi was in the same situation, coming off a bad year, had a lot of money still left. And the word, it was sort of like the same thing. Oh, no, Nnamdi's, under contract. And then literally like 8 hours later, Nnamdi had been released. So you never know what to make from it. But it is interesting when you sort of compare it to how he talked about Hassan Reddick, right, where ordinarily you would hear how he probably say, oh, hey, Hassan's under contract. We're happy to have him. If someone's going to blow us away, sure, we would take an offer, but we would do that for anybody. That's kind of his standard way of talking about this, but he did not. He and Nick were sort of very vague on it. So it's weird that they were vague on a guy who, like Hassan Reddick, but maybe a little bit more so on James Bradbury.
Yeah, Bradbury, who obviously has a signed deal, and if they moved him, he would have a lot of dead money. And that goes to, does Bradbury fit in better in this defense? Everyone just assumes, Fangio runs the same defense as Desai, who runs the same defense as Gannon. Is that fair or unfair?
Probably not fair. We've always said that the Fangio defense and its disciples, they all do things a little bit differently. They all put their own fingerprints on it. It's not just a how you align thing. It's also your play calling, your safety rotation, your match carry deliver system. And not everybody does it the exact same way. So, it's fair to say you should see similar components, like a 5-man front, right? A lot of quarters coverage, a lot of 2 deep that turns into 1 deep, post-snap, pre-snap. Yeah, those are staples of a Fangio concept defense, but everybody kind of adds their own twist on it, because you saw that what Gannon did and what Sean Desai did were very different, and they're both quote-unquote Fangio concept guys. But I thought Desai played a whole litany of different styles of coverages on back-to-back snaps than, say, Jonathan Gannon would.
All right. So anything at the Combine that kind of has caught your attention or your eyes? You guys have been out there all week long, all three of you, getting stuff, kind of uncovering people, talking to people. If you were doing your Peter King Monday morning quarterback and emptying your notebook here, anything kind of stand out while you've been out there?
A couple of things, and again, if I'm going to do that, I got to, we'll talk next Monday. It'll probably be a little easier because I'll have decompressed a little bit from here. And then also, as we're talking right now, I just had a few chats with a couple of agents who had multiple meetings left today, right? Including some with the Eagles. So it's until those happen and until there's more talk and then I follow up, don't get a lot. But I'd tell you one thing I came across and talked about it on the pod that came out this morning with Adam Kaplan. The Eagles made a running back addition in Lou Nichols. I think he was signed to their practice squad at the end of the year last year or something like that, and brought back. And he's a big guy, but he's also got some juice to him. And they liked him. They liked Lou Nichols, and he was a guy that whenever he came out of, and I can't remember at the moment what college he came out of, but he was someone who was on their radar. So it's easier to sometimes look at these guys as, you're on the practice squad, you're just a camp body, like you're Kennedy Brooks from a few years ago out of Oklahoma, you're never going to get a shot. But right now the Eagles only have a couple of guys under contract at that position. It's Kenny Gainwell. It's the kid that just picked up from San Francisco, Ty Davis-Price, and Lou Nichols. But he'll be a kind of a fun guy to watch in OTAs. And, of course, in the preseason, he'll probably get a lot of carries. And I was just kind of surprised to hear that he got some juice and probably should look at him as more than just a body.
Yeah.
Well, let's see what they do. They can do, if they add two running backs here in free agency or in the draft, then maybe that changes the conversation. But I just thought that was an interesting nugget.
Lou Nichols, by the way, Central Michigan. Is that a Chippewa?
Oh, I thought that was Western. I'm bad with my Michigan.
I know,
schools.
Central Michigan, not 100. I'm just guessing Chippewa because you got all those Eastern Michigans, Western Michigans. He is a Central Michigan. Josh tells me it is, in fact, the Chippewas. He was a seventh round.
By you.
Yeah, thanks, man. He was a seventh round pick by the Packers. Big guy, 5'10", 220 pounds. MAC Offensive Player of the Year, was the Offensive Freshman of the Year. So sometimes there's these guys that no one ever heard of. I'm sure there's a lot of running backs in this league that no one ever heard of, and you're like, where did this guy come from? Like if I said to people, where did Tony Pollard go to college? Do you remember his college career at all? There's tons of guys.
I know he went to Memphis, but nobody else would know that.
Right, exactly. Unless you're a hardcore college football fan, like some of these guys who play running back in this league are just guys, and that's part of the thing, though. Like you ask a guy out in Denver where Isaiah Pacheco went to school, they probably never heard of the guy in college. It was a part-time.
100%.
Right. So running back is one of these guys that you can find a guy and just kind of plug and play. I'll ask you this. If I was to give you which running back would have the most carries, is it Kenny Gainwell or somebody not on the current roster?
Somebody not on the current roster.
That's your guess. You would say someone that's not here right now will lead the team in touches next year.
Yeah. Now, this thing could be like, to your point, it could be like 33% that person, 32% Gainwell, and then another 20-some-odd% of whoever's next or split between two other guys. Because I don't want to dismiss how much they do like Gainwell and how because he is a good pass protector, he's always the one who's out there in the 4-minute drill, the 2-minute drill. So he does have value in the team in his last year.
Is Boston Scott back on the team?
Working on that one.
All right. Well, come back Monday for Football at 4 with Geoff Mosher. Check out the Inside the Birds podcast. And, of course, you can download that on all podcasting platforms and check out their YouTube social media. Just search Inside the Birds. Geoff Mosher. All right, buddy. Thanks.
You got it. Take care, buddy.
All right. Good stuff on Football at 4 today on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN and the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app. I like that. Boston Scott, will he be on the team next year? He says, I'm working on that one.